Good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 16th July 2025, and today we have some important topics from different newspapers. So, one by one, we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner. And the overall objective of this discussion is to make sure that you adequately understand all current topics in a detailed manner. So therefore, without any further delay, let's get into the discussion and let's understand all these topics in a very detailed manner. And the first topic that we are going to discuss is about rethinking global leadership in the context of rising BRICS. So we all knew that when we talk about BRICS as a multilateral grouping, we majorly know 5 countries. They are India, Brazil, South Africa, Russia and China. So we mostly know these 5 countries. But in recent times, the BRICS has been expanding because recently Iran became a member of BRICS grouping along with Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt and Indonesia also, and number of other countries are also willing to join the BRICS grouping. So therefore, in this context, we'll understand how it is going to shape the global leadership. So we will understand this topic first. Now this is very important for General Studies paper 2. And this could be also important for the essay paper as well, right? So if you carefully look at the context of this topic, so the context is that the 2025 BRICS summit, so it is the 7th BRICS summit and that took place in Brazil. And this 7th BRICS summit has highlighted the erosion of multilateralism. Right? So what is a multilateralism? So multilateralism is actually a group, or multilateralism is a framework or an architecture where a number of countries would come together and they decide or they take important decisions based on the consensus, and that is multilateralism. So if I can tell you an example of multilateralism, so WTO is an example of multilateralism. So don't you think that the WTO is going through the erosion? So therefore, the BRICS has highlighted the erosion of multilateralism such as WTO. Now this is particularly in the context of US shifting itself from multilateralism to bilateralism. So US under the president of Donald Trump, now it has been emphasizing on bilateralism. So when US has been emphasizing on bilateralism, it led to the decline or erosion of multilateralism. So therefore, this editorial specifically urges India to recalibrate its global strategy. Now, India follows a policy called strategic autonomy. A number of times we have discussed what exactly is a policy of strategic autonomy. So India is independent to take its own decisions based on its own national interest. So that is what is called as strategic autonomy. Now if I can tell you an example of strategic autonomy, now when Russia-Ukraine war has been taken place, so US and other Western countries forced India to stop buying Russian oil. But despite such a huge pressure from Western countries on India, India go ahead and purchased Russian oil, because purchasing Russian oil is in India's interest, and this is what is called as the strategic autonomy. So therefore, India follows a policy called strategic autonomy, and in fact, India also emphasizes on South-South cooperation, because India looks itself as a leader of the global South. leader of global south. Now, a line called Brent line, which divides the entire world into global north and global south. Now, global north is developed, industrialized region with high standard of living, but contrary to that, the global south is underdeveloped area or underdeveloped region that includes the South America, African continent, Southeast Asia and South Asia. Right? So global south is underdeveloped region. Now in this context, India is known as leader of the global south, so India should also emphasize on south-south cooperation, and along with that, India's internal transformation is also very important because India as a country is struggling with number of challenges, and India also have an aspiration to become a developed country by the year 2047. So therefore, the south-south cooperation, domestic transformation, so all these factors are very, very important. They in fact play a very important role in ensuring India a global leader in the coming decade. Right? So if we go into this topic, now how multilateralism has been declining and how US has been emphasizing on bilateralism. If you look at US under Donald Trump, now you can clearly observe that there is a shift towards bilateralism from the multilateralism. And in fact, US has been clearly sidelining the United Nations and further weakening the collective mechanisms such as G77. So therefore, don't you think that there has been a clear and visible decline of multilateralism, and this is what the 17th BRICS summit has highlighted. And in BRICS 2025 declaration, so it has avoided addressing this structural disruption that has been taking place. Now, what is a structural disruption? The structural disruption is erosion of multilateralism and rise of bilateralism. And the BRICS declaration has avoided this structural disruption that has been taking place. Now we all knew that when Trump became the president of United States, so he started imposing tariffs on number of countries. However, the tariffs which are imposed by US on other countries are very often called by experts as unilateral tariffs, because Trump, he himself announces tariffs on other countries, whether it is India, China, Russia. So because of that reason, they are being called as unilateral tariffs, and these unilateral tariffs very often leads to the trade wars as well. And in fact, the bilateral negotiations are also being used by US as a tactic to gain some economic concessions, right? So we can clearly see that US has been moving away from the already established rules-based order, and US has been imposing the unilateral tariffs, and it has been giving emphasis to the bilateral negotiations contrary to the multilateralism, right? So this is called by experts that US is moving away from the rules-based order. And in fact, the bilateral negotiations or recalibration of the diplomacy can be clearly seen after the World War II. However, with these multilateral institutions are weakening, for example, whether it is United Nations, World Trade Organizations, they are called as multilateral institutions, and these multilateral institutions are clearly weakening. And in fact, because of this reason, the global south can no longer depend on the traditional platforms. For example, the global south so far depended on UN. The global south also depended on WTO, but they are declining. So in the context of decline of these multilateral institutions, global south can no longer rely on the traditional platforms for bargaining. So therefore, India's influence, so how far India can influence the other countries, so it actually depends on building strong regional and bilateral partnerships, not the ideological voting blocks. So it is not about the ideological voting blocks, rather how strong India can actually build regional and bilateral partnerships. So that actually shapes India's overall influence. Now, after that, if we talk about India's strategic and economic reorientation, India must articulate neutrality. So India must be neutral. There are number of centers of power around the world, whether it is Russia, European Union, US and China. So they are being called as global centers of power. India is balancing among these global centers of power, so therefore India must articulate the neutrality among the global powers while asserting its core national interests. So India as a nation have a certain core national interests. So therefore India must assert its core national interests, and it should also articulate the neutrality among the global power centers. However, so one example of this is recently India lost UNESCO's executive board seat to Pakistan, and that clearly highlights the urgency for India to recalibrate its overall diplomacy. There is a need to recalibrate India's diplomacy. And apart from that, India can also align towards the ASEAN bloc. So ASEAN is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and that was established or founded in the year 1967. Right, so this trade alignment towards ASEAN, and that will be coupled with massive infrastructure investments such as high-speed rail, digital networks, so that can actually compensate for declining US exports and stimulating the internal demand as well. Right, so US has been adopting the protectionist policies. Now protectionist policies adopted by US and the tariffs that are being imposed by US on Indian goods, so all these factors have been leading to the decline in India's exports to US. So therefore India should align with ASEAN bloc, and India should start investing in infrastructure such as high-speed rail, digital networks, and that can compensate the declining US exports. And apart from that, now if you look at India, so it is ahead of UK and Germany in terms of general AI patent filings as per World Intellectual Property Organization. And apart from that, a country also has the foundational advantage when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution. Right, so fourth industrial revolution can be a game changer for India. So it can actually drive the indigenous growth as well as the global competitiveness for Indian products as well. And apart from that, we should also understand the security, India's borders, and the South-South prosperity as well. Now there is a shift from heavy grounded forces, so for example the armed forces, navy, army, and the air force, right? So we can generally call them as ground forces, right? So there is a shift from a heavy ground forces to integrated technology. So these integrated technologies efficiently use drones, satellites, and AI, and that we have seen during Operation Sindoor, because during Operation Sindoor we have used drones to attack Pakistan's terrorist camps. So therefore, this integrated technologies generally involves drones, satellites and AI can actually give a strategic depth that is required and economic efficiency, thereby aligning the military doctrine with the global best practices. And in fact, in recent times, we can clearly observe diplomatic overtures on the part of India and China, particularly the India-China border demarcation, and therefore there is there is also renewed interest in the Indus Water Treaty, and that indicates there is a transition from the confrontation to long-term trust building for economic cooperation among India and its neighboring countries. However, the upcoming BRICS summit is going to be held in India. So therefore, for India, it actually presents an opportunity for India to build new value chains across the global south. Right? So we have to integrate the global south with new value chains. And we should also prioritize mutual prosperity for entire global south over these outdated multilateral bargains with the global north. And that is what it has been emphasizing, that so it actually emphasizing that the multilateralism is clearly on decline. Because of this reason, for global south, India should emerge as a leader. However, India to become a leader, India should look and work on certain areas so that India can actually emerge as a leader of the global south. Right? So BRICS actually provides India an opportunity to emerge as the leader, a key pole in the global south. I hope you have understood this topic. And next topic is revisiting consent and criminalization. And this is a very important topic for your gender studies paper 2. And this has been given in the Hindu newspaper. So if we understand the context of this topic, the context is that the Supreme Court in one of its judgments, a right to privacy of adolescents. So the judgment of 2025, the Supreme Court has rightly invoked Article 142. So I hope all of you knew what is Article 142. So Article 142 talks about the power of the Supreme Court to do complete justice in any matter. So that is what Article 142 of the Indian Constitution talks about. It gives unlimited powers to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has invoked Article 142 to choose not to sentence a man who is convicted under Section 6 of the POCSO Act. So therefore, it has been highlighting a real life emotional, economic and social hardships faced by the adolescent girl who is involved. Now we all knew about the POCSO Act and its stringent punishments. Now POCSO Act is protection of children from sexual offences. So any child who is below 18 years of age, any sexual abuse, sexual harassment, penetrative, non-penetrative sex, so it will be considered as a crime. So therefore, it also imposes harsh punishments on the accused and the guilty or the guilty. So therefore, however, in recent times, there is a problem with the POCSO. So there are the false cases. There are false cases under POCSO, and apart from false cases, what about the consensual sexual relationship among the individuals? And the POCSO has not recognized the consensual sexual relationship among people who are below 18 years of age. So therefore, the Supreme Court has invoked Article 142 of the Indian Constitution, chose not to sentence a man who is convicted under Section 6 of the POCSO Act. So therefore, it clearly highlights the real life emotional, economic, social hardships faced by adolescent girl who is involved. So therefore, overall, this judgment of the Supreme Court has reopened the critical discourse, because as of now the POCSO case is known as a very stringent case. However, there are several cases which involves the consensual adolescent relationships. So these consensual adolescent relationships are also criminalized under the POCSO Act. So therefore, it actually opens a critical debate or a discourse on the criminalizing consensual adolescent relationships and also need for the legal reform within the POCSO Act. Now, we'll be understanding the judicial trajectory and the legal paradoxes which are existing. Now, as I have already told you that Article 142 of the Indian Constitution, it talks about the power of the Supreme Court to do a complete justice or a substantive justice. So therefore, the Supreme Court has invoked Article 142 of the Indian Constitution, and this provision has been used to not impose a mandatory 20-year sentence on the convict. Right? So convicted individual under the POCSO Act, under Article 142, the Supreme Court has done. Supreme Court has not imposed a mandatory 20-year sentence under the POCSO Act to the convict, despite upholding his conviction under the POCSO Act, citing victims' well-being and also families, the socio-economic distress. So the Supreme Court has taken into consideration these factors when it has invoked Article 142 of the Indian Constitution. However, the Calcutta High Court initially acquitted the accused individual on humanitarian grounds. And in fact, the Calcutta High Court had also made some regressive remarks about women. So the Calcutta High Court had said that the adolescent girls should control their sexual urges, reflecting entrenched patriarchal biases which are existing in Indian society. So obviously, such a statement from Calcutta High Court would be considered as a regressive remark. However, the Supreme Court has rightly dismissed the concepts like non-exploitative sexual acts, older adolescents. Though the Supreme Court has recognized Children Rights General Comment number 20 and medical discourse, so thereby resisting evolving international norms on adolescent consent. However, if we talk about the systematic failures and institutional gaps which are highlighted by the Supreme Court, the court has rightly acknowledged the victim has suffered due to the family rejection and inadequate child protection systems, and even the procedural trauma that the victim had gone through. So therefore, the Supreme Court, taking into account all these different factors, illustrated the systematic failure in addressing the adolescent sexuality sensitively. And apart from that, there are the empirical studies as well, and these empirical studies also revealed that a significant proportion of these POCSO cases, they actually involve the consensual relationship. For example, so those individuals, for example, an individual who is above 18 years of age and a female who is less than 18 years of age, so that would comes under the POCSO Act. Right, so that would comes under the POCSO Act. So however, even if it is a consensual sexual relationship, then also it will be treated as a crime against children. Right, so however, the empirical evidence has been suggesting that most of the cases under the POCSO involved the consensual relationship with adolescents who are aged 16 to 18, where victims often refused to depose against the accused partners. However, the court has suggested using Juvenile Justice Act for rehabilitative measures through the child welfare committees. Field evidence also indicates that adolescents in such cases are frequently face the institutionalization and also emotional distress rather than support. These are some of the systematic and structural issues which are existing. However, there is a need for the reform within the POCSO Act. So therefore, there is a need to re-examine blanket criminalization under the POCSO Act, because as of now there is a rigid age of consent bar at 18 years of age, and this does not accommodate the consensual sexual relationships among the older adolescents who are above age 16 years of age. And apart from that, there is a need for a differentiated approach, and this differentiated approach could help prevent the misuse of the POCSO cases against the non-exploitative consensual sexual relationships. And in fact, the consent of adolescents who are aged 16 plus should be legally recognized with safeguards such as ensuring absence of coercion, unequal power dynamics, or authority-based influence such as teachers and employers. So therefore, overall, the Supreme Court has directed the center to explore implementing comprehensive sexuality education, psychological counseling, emergency services, and life skills training, which are essential and important components for adolescent empowerment and system reform. Overall, there is a need for a comprehensive reforms within the POCSO Act as well. Right? I hope you have understood this topic, and the next topic is Subhanshu Shukla's space return. Now, the context is that we all knew that Subhanshu Shukla, the first Indian astronaut who recently went to International Space Station. Right? So Subhanshu Shukla safely returned to Earth. Right? So the context is that the SpaceX Dragon, which is carrying Axiom 4 crew, including pilot Subhanshu Shukla, so they were successfully returned to Earth on 15th July 2025 after 20 days International Space Station mission. So thereby marking milestone as Shukla became the first Indian pilot a private commercial space mission. Right? So in fact, Subhanshu Shukla is a pilot of private commercial space mission. I hope you have understood this, and he also safely returned back home. Now, if we talk about this Axiom space mission, so it was launched by both NASA and Axiom Space, and they have used SpaceX Dragon crew spacecraft. However, it actually marked one of the first fully private crewed missions to the International Space Station, combining NASA's infrastructure with commercial spaceflight. And the crew also included Commander Peggy Whitson, USA, pilot Subhanshu Shukla, India, and mission specialists from Poland and Hungary. If we talk about India's role and achievements as part of the Axiom 4 mission and Subhanshu Shukla's successful journey to the International Space Station, Subhanshu Shukla became the first Indian pilot of a commercial orbital space mission and first Indian to reach the International Space Station via US mission. So this is a very important for prelims exam, so you have to remember this. So therefore, overall, Subhanshu Shukla's role actually reflects India's increasing participation in global private space flight and collaborative exploration efforts beyond ISRO-led missions. And in fact, This successful feat also aligns with India's broader ambitions under the space policy of 2023, which encourages private sector participation, astronaut training, and even international partnerships. And in fact, Subhanshu Shukla's successful journey to the International Space Station and his experience will help in India's ambitious Gaganyaan mission, which is manned mission to space. Now, if we talk about the International Space Station, so this is a habitable artificial satellite which is orbiting in the low Earth orbit. And if we talk about the altitude range of International Space Station, which is approximately 370 kilometers to 460 kilometers above planet Earth. And in fact, the International Space Station also serves as a microgravity and space environment research laboratory, where crew members conduct several experiments in the fields like biology, physics, astronomy, and the material science. And if we talk about the key partners in the International Space Agency, Space Station, because International Space Station is a multinational collaborative effort. It involves number of different countries coming together, and they are setting up the International Space Station. So those countries including NASA by United States, Roscosmos of Russia, European Space Agency that represents 22 European countries, JAXA of Japan, and CSA, which is Canadian Space Agency. So all these countries are partner agencies of the International Space Station. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. And if you like our lecture, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.